What if the secret to a container garden that looks incredible all season wasn't more watering, more fertilizing, or more time, but simply choosing the right plants from the start? Most people treat container gardening like it requires constant attention. Daily watering, weekly feeding, deadheading every few days. And if you've been doing it that way, I want you to understand something. That isn't container gardening. That's babysitting. And the reason your pots look exhausted by July and dead by August isn't that containers are hard. It's that annuals were never designed to take care of themselves. Perennials were. The plants that built the world's most beautiful container displays, the ones on the doorsteps of old European farmhouses, the terracotta pots of Italian courtyards, the stone urns of English kitchen gardens. They weren't filled with impatiens and petunias. They were filled with plants that came back every year, that handled dry spells without drama, that filled in, spilled over, and looked better in their third season than they did in their first. Today, I'm giving you 11 of the laziest, most container-worthy perennials in existence. By the time we get to number 9, you'll understand why one plant is so dramatically beautiful in pots that it stops strangers in their tracks and starts conversations, and the only care it needs is benign neglect. And number 11 is so indestructible that gardeners have left it on a bare concrete step for a full summer and come back to find it thriving. If you want containers that take care of themselves and still stop people in their tracks, hit subscribe right now. Let's get into it. 1. Sedum, the container plant that waters itself. Sedum, also called stonecrop, is the first plant on this list because it represents a fundamental shift in how you think about container gardening. Most container plants ask you to maintain them. Sedum asks you to leave it alone. Those are not the same relationship, and for busy gardeners, the difference is everything. Sedum is a succulent perennial that stores water in its thick, fleshy leaves. It can go weeks without irrigation in most climates and simply doesn't care. The root system is shallow and adapts beautifully to container life. It doesn't need deep pots. It doesn't need rich soil. It actively prefers the lean, fast-draining conditions that would stress most other plants. The variety within the Sedum genus is extraordinary. Low-growing ground cover types like dragon's blood spread across the top of a container in a ruby-red mat. Upright varieties like autumn joy, one of the most reliably beautiful perennials ever introduced, grows to 2 feet, produces broad flat flower heads that open pink in summer and transition through copper to rust to a deep chocolate brown that holds through winter. That single plant provides interest across 6 months without a single intervention. Bees and butterflies cover sedum in bloom. The flat-topped flower clusters are particularly attractive to late-season pollinators when other nectar sources are declining. In autumn, when the rest of your container garden is winding down, sedum is often at its peak. Traditional use: planted as the thriller or mid-height element in mixed containers or as a standalone specimen in a shallow bowl or trough. Gritty, well-draining potting mix. Full sun. Water maybe once a week in peak summer heat. Forget about it the rest of the time. Come back to flowers, too. Hosta, the shade container that never quits. Most gardeners think of hostas as ground cover plants for difficult shade beds. They are, but they are equally, arguably more spectacular in containers. And in a container, the hosta does something it can't always do in the ground. It becomes a specimen, a statement. Something you look at deliberately rather than past. Hostas in pots grow faster than most people expect. The contained root environment concentrates the plant's energy. A medium-sized variety in a generous container can reach full display size within a single growing season. By the second year, it is commanding. The variety in the hosta world means you can choose your effect precisely. Sum and substance fills a large pot with enormous chartreuse gold leaves that glow in shade. Halcyon produces blue-green leaves that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it, cool and architectural. Fire and ice gives you dramatic white centers with deep green edges. Patriot reverses that dark green with broad white margins that brighten even the deepest shade. All of them ask for essentially nothing. Water when the top inch of soil is dry. Fertilize once in spring if you feel generous. Divide every 3 to 4 years. Otherwise, leave them alone. They come back every year, they get better every year, and they make expensive containers look justified. Traditional use: a large single hosta as the centerpiece of a shaded entryway container. Combined with heuchera for year-round foliage contrast in a mixed shade pot. Positioned anywhere sun-loving plants refuse to perform. The solution plant. The shade hero. 3. Heuchera, the year-round color machine. If you want color in a container 12 months of the year, not just during bloom season but every single day, in every single season, heuchera is the answer. No other perennial delivers year-round container color as consistently or as effortlessly. Heuchera, commonly called coral bells, is grown primarily for its foliage. And that foliage comes in a range that most people find genuinely startling when they first encounter it. Deep burgundy, caramel orange, lime green, silver with purple veining, near black with metallic sheen, electric amber that catches afternoon light like stained glass. The breeding work done on heuchera over the last 20 years has made it one of the most visually diverse plants in cultivation. The flowers are a bonus. In late spring and early summer, wiry stems rise above the mound and produce tiny bell-shaped flowers, usually coral, pink, or white, that hummingbirds find irresistible. But the foliage is the feature. It persists from spring through hard frost. In mild climates, it is essentially evergreen. In containers, heuchera functions as a living color anchor. It holds the pot's visual interest when companion plants are between bloom cycles. It provides contrast against flowers. It makes everything around it look better. Traditional use: as the color foil in mixed containers, the dark burgundy heuchera at the base of a bright yellow daylily creates a combination that looks deliberately designed and requires almost no work. Partial shade to full shade preferred. Water when dry. Divide every 3 to 4 years to maintain vigor. No deadheading. No fussing. Just color. 4. Daylilies. The repeat bloomer that asks nothing. A daylily in a container is a different experience than a daylily in the ground. Contained, with its root system compressed and focused, a daylily concentrates its energy into bloom production in a way that can be genuinely dramatic. The right variety in the right size pot will produce dozens of blooms across weeks without a single intervention beyond occasional water. Each daylily bloom lasts one day. That's the name. But a mature clump produces buds continuously across the bloom cycle, creating the impression of constant color. No deadheading is required because the spent blooms fall cleanly on their own. The plant is essentially self-cleaning. The compact and reblooming varieties are the best choices for containers. Stella d'Oro is the gold standard for container daylilies, a compact 12-inch plant that blooms from June through frost with minimal interruption and tolerates container life extremely well. Happy Returns, Rosy Returns, and Chicago Apache all perform similarly. Reblooming varieties give you multiple distinct flush cycles across the season rather than one concentrated burst. Daylilies in containers are remarkably drought-tolerant once established. They can tolerate missing a watering. They don't need deadheading. They don't need staking. In mild climates, they overwinter in the container without issue. In cold climates, move them to a sheltered spot or unplanted garage, and they push back up in spring as if nothing happened. Traditional use: as the centerpiece thriller in a large statement container in full sun. Combined with ornamental grasses for texture and contrast, planted in a row of identical containers for a formal entryway effect. The plant that makes visitors ask what it is and where you got it. 5. Catmint, the spiller that takes care of itself. In the language of container design, there are thrillers, fillers, and spillers. Catmint is the most beautiful, most low-maintenance spiller in the perennial world. Nothing else flows over a container edge with the same effortless grace, and then flowers continuously for months without asking for anything. Catmint's soft, silver-green mounds produce lavender-blue flower spikes from late spring through summer. The stems relax outward naturally, cascading over container rims and softening hard edges. The effect is the romantic, overflowing container you see in British garden photography, that look of a pot that has simply been growing long enough to develop its own character. It is extraordinarily drought-tolerant. It handles heat. It is deer-resistant, pest-resistant, and essentially problem-free. Cut it back by half after the first bloom flush, and it rebounds with a full second bloom in late summer that carries into fall. 2 waves of lavender blue from a single plant per season. The fragrance is an additional gift. Catmint smells of light mint and herbs when you brush against it. Positioned near a doorway or seating area, it releases that scent every time someone passes. That's not an accident. That's the kind of sensory reward that makes a garden feel designed rather than assembled. Traditional use, as the spiller in mixed containers, planted at the outer edge where stems can cascade freely. In a container on its own as a relaxed aromatic mound, paired with upright salvias or roses for a classic cottage combination. Sun to partial shade, water when dry, that's the entire care requirement. 6. Lavender. The pot that perfumes your whole patio. Lavender in a container is one of the most beautiful, most useful, and most frequently mishandled plants in gardening. The mishandling comes from one mistake: overwatering. Fix that, and lavender in a pot is essentially maintenance-free. Lavender evolved in thin, rocky, alkaline Mediterranean soils that drain almost instantaneously and receive no supplemental irrigation. In a container with well-draining, gritty mix, lavender replicates those conditions exactly. It wants to dry out between waterings. It wants full sun. It wants to be left alone. The payoff for this minimal treatment is extraordinary. Silver-green aromatic foliage that looks beautiful even when not in bloom. Flower spikes in deep purple, soft pink, or white from early to midsummer. The fragrance, one of the most studied and documented aromatherapy scents in existence, with clinical research supporting its calming and stress-reducing effects, released continuously from the foliage every time the air moves. Compact varieties are best for containers. Hidcote stays tight and upright to about 12 inches. Munstead is slightly larger and one of the most cold-hardy options. Little Lottie produces soft pink blooms and stays genuinely compact. All overwinter reliably in containers in zones 5 and above when given good drainage and a sheltered position. Traditional use: a terracotta pot of lavender flanking a doorway. Planted as a single specimen in a simple container that lets the plant's natural form be the design. Harvested for dried bundles, sachets, and culinary use. The plant that works as hard in the kitchen as it does in the garden. 7. Blue fescue. The architectural grass that needs nothing. Every container planting needs something that provides structure when everything else is between bloom cycles. Blue fescue, Festuca glauca, is the architectural element that holds a container's visual presence year-round without any care at all. Blue fescue forms a tight, perfectly symmetrical mound of narrow blue-silver blades that reaches 8 to 12 inches in height and width. It doesn't flop. It doesn't spread. It doesn't require cutting back, staking, or any intervention. It simply sits there looking impossibly architectural and beautiful through every season. The blue-silver coloring is among the most striking in the plant world. It catches light differently throughout the day: pale blue in morning light, silver at midday, almost metallic at golden hour. In winter, the mound persists, providing color and form when everything around it has gone dormant. Blue fescue thrives in heat, poor soil, and drought. In containers, it wants fast drainage and full sun. It does not want to sit wet. Given those conditions, it requires essentially no attention. Divide every 2 to 3 years to rejuvenate the center. Older clumps can die out in the middle and the division maintains vigor. That is the entire maintenance requirement. Traditional use: as the thriller or mid-height focal point in a simple container, allowing the architectural form to be the design, paired with sedums and sempervivums in a drought-tolerant container combination. In a row of identical pots for a formal, repeating effect along a walkway or terrace. 8. Salvia, the repeat bloomer that lasts all season. Perennial salvias, particularly Salvia nemorosa and its cultivars, represent one of the best-kept secrets in container gardening. They bloom early. They rebloom reliably. They tolerate drought. They are attractive to pollinators. They don't require deadheading. And they come back every year looking better than the last. Caradonna is arguably the most beautiful of the group. Deep purple-blue flower spikes on near-black stems from May through June. Cut it back after bloom, and it produces a second full flush in August. East Friesland covers itself in rich violet blue. Maynight produces the deepest indigo purple in the group. All are compact 12 to 18 inches and perfectly suited to container life. The foliage is aromatic, slightly rough-textured and deer-resistant. The square stems are architecturally interesting. Between bloom cycles, the plant holds its form cleanly rather than collapsing. Salvia nemorosa thrives in hot, dry conditions. In a container, it actually performs better than in the ground because the heat and drainage that containers naturally provide mimic the Mediterranean conditions these plants evolved in. Full sun, well-drained potting mix, water when dry, no deadheading required. The spent spikes are architectural and can be left or removed based on preference. Traditional use. As the vertical thriller in a mixed container with catmint spilling below and heuchera providing foliage contrast. In a standalone container where the architectural upright form is the design statement, paired with roses for a classic high-low cottage combination. 9. Agapanthus. The container that stops traffic. Agapanthus is not a subtle plant. When a large container of agapanthus comes into bloom, trumpet-shaped flowers in brilliant blue-violet arranged in globes on tall stems above broad-strap foliage, it stops people. It creates conversation. It is the kind of container display that earns a garden a reputation. And in terms of care, it is remarkably close to effortless. Agapanthus, African lily, is a bulbous perennial that thrives in containers because it actually performs better when slightly root-bound. Unlike most perennials that need dividing every few years, Agapanthus flowers most prolifically when its roots are crowded. A container that looks too small for the plant is often exactly the right size for bloom production. This makes it uniquely suited to pot culture in ways that ground planting doesn't replicate. The strap-like foliage is attractive from the moment it emerges in spring through the end of the season. Flower stems rise to 24 to 36 inches, topped by globe-shaped umbels containing dozens of individual trumpet blooms in shades from deep navy to soft sky blue to pure white. Midnight blue, storm cloud, and white heaven are among the most striking varieties. In zones 8 and warmer, Agapanthus overwinters in containers without intervention. In colder zones, bring the container to a frost-free garage or basement for winter, minimal watering, minimal light. It goes dormant, waits, and returns in spring. Traditional use. As a statement specimen in a large, simple container where the plant's architecture is the design, flanking a doorway in matching pots, as the focal point of a terrace container arrangement. The plant that makes guests ask where you found it. 10. Penstemon. The hummingbird magnet in a pot. If you want to watch hummingbirds hover at eye level from your patio chair, plant a container of penstemon. Position it near your favorite seating. Sit down. Wait approximately 48 hours. The hummingbirds will find it. Penstemon, beard tongue, produces tubular flowers perfectly shaped for hummingbird foraging, in colors from deep scarlet and coral through lavender, purple, and white. The bloom period is long, typically June through August, and the plant reblooms readily with light cutting back after the first flush. Husker red is the most widely available and one of the most striking deep wine red foliage throughout the season with white blush flowers. The foliage alone makes it a compelling container plant before it even blooms. Prairie jewel produces flowers in a mixed range of colors, pink, lavender, white, on a single compact plant. Electric blue delivers intense violet blue blooms on an upright stem. Penstemon is drought-tolerant and actually performs better in containers than in heavy garden soils where drainage is poor. It wants full sun and fast drainage. It does not want to sit wet. Given proper drainage, it is remarkably self-sufficient, one of the most reliable hummingbird plants for container culture available. Traditional use. As the thriller in a pollinator and hummingbird container combination with catmint and salvia. As a specimen plant in a simple container positioned near windows or seating where the hummingbird visits can be enjoyed up close. 11. Sempervivum, the plant that cannot be killed. We close with the one plant on this list that deserves its own category. Not just lazy, not just low maintenance. Sempervivum, hens and chicks, is genuinely unkillable in a container And I want you to take that word seriously. Sempervivums are alpine succulents that evolved to survive on bare rock faces in mountain environments that receive almost no soil, almost no water, and temperature swings from freezing to scorching within a single day. In a container, they find themselves in paradise by comparison. They ask for essentially nothing and reward that neglect with some of the most geometrically beautiful rosette forms in the plant world. The variety in Sempervivum is remarkable. Rosettes in deep burgundy, silver green, olive, near black, bright red-tipped green, and everything in between. The rosettes multiply continuously, producing offset rosettes called chicks that fill containers with a dense, jewel-like tapestry. In summer, occasional rosettes send up tall bloom stalks covered in starry flowers before dying. Each individual rosette blooms once, but the surrounding chicks immediately fill the space. Sempervivums are fully hardy in containers down to Zone 3. They don't need winter protection. They don't need supplemental water in most climates. They don't need fertilizer. They don't need anything. They simply persist, multiply, and look extraordinary while doing so. Traditional use: planted in hyper-draining containers, terracotta, stone troughs, shallow dishes, with a gritty, almost pure mineral mix. In a collection of small pots for an alpine-themed container display. In the cracks and edges of larger containers as a filler that requires zero attention. The plant you give to every person you know who claims they have a black thumb, because Sempervivum will prove them wrong. 11 plants. One fundamental idea behind all of them. The right plant in the right container doesn't just survive. It thrives without your help. It fills in, spills over, comes back the following year, and looks better each season because it was given conditions that match what it actually is: a perennial, not an annual, not a temporary display, not something that needs constant life support. Container gardening the lazy way isn't about doing less. It's about choosing smarter. Choose sedum over petunias and stop worrying about watering. Choose catmint over lobelia and stop deadheading. Choose heuchera over caladium and gain year-round color instead of a 4-month window. The containers that stop people in their tracks, the ones they photograph, the ones they ask about, aren't maintained harder than everyone else's. They're planted smarter. The work happened at the garden center. Everything after that was patience. Pick 2 or 3 from this list that match your sun exposure and your honest watering habits. Plant them this spring. Come back in 3 years and tell me what you think. Drop a comment and tell me which one you're already growing and which one you're trying this season. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed to Health and Longevity yet, hit that button now. We post every week, and we're just getting started. See you in the next one.